Good evening, everyone. Hello. I love having a captive audience. It is both an honor and a personal joy to introduce Femke Herregraven and her Creator Doctus project. Today, as we celebrate the culmination of years of research and artistic work, I want to take a moment to reflect not only on the work itself, which is extraordinary, but also on the process and the relationship that made it possible. In academia and the arts, we often talk about collaboration as an abstract ideal, something we aspire to. But working with Femke has been a vivid, living example of what true collaboration can mean. From the outset, her approach was one of generosity, intellectual rigor, and a fearless willingness to ask difficult questions, not just about her own work, but about the systems and structures we inhabit. Her insights challenged me to think in new ways, and in doing so, have left a lasting imprint on my own perspectives and my own research methodology. What stands out to me most, however, is Femke's ability to create a relational space where ideas can be nurtured, challenged, and transformed. She has an ability to draw connections that are both unexpected and deeply resonant, and this has made our conversations of the last few years not just productive, but profoundly meaningful. Her work has taught me that research is not just about outcomes, but about the relationships and dialogues that shape the journey. For Femke, the Creator Doctus was never an endpoint. It was a framework for inquiry, a way of navigating the world, and a space for relational practices to flourish. As I introduce her today, I invite you to see not just the finished project, but also the traces of the dialogues, exchanges, and moments of shared discovery that have been integral to its making. Femke, it has been a privilege to walk alongside you this path. Your work inspires, but your way of being a critical, engaged, and relational thinker and maker leaves an even deeper mark. I am so grateful to have been part of your Creator Doctus trajectory. Thank you very much.
I'm doing something tonight which I haven't done the whole trajectory, which is actually write a text and read it to you, hopefully not in a too boring way. Usually I'm much more sort of financial freestyle, that's what I always call it, to talk about my work, just a bit improvisation. But since this trajectory was so elaborate, it encompassed 13 projects. I want to be precise to make the connections, so I hope you can bear with me. It's supposed to be around an hour, but there's lots of images, so. And first of all, I want to say a big thank you to Sonberg Institute, Rietveld, for inviting me, making this trajectory possible. It has been really super valuable and amazing to be able to develop your work as an artist within this framework, within a sort of deeper underlying thread. And the person who is very crucial in this and who would have not, I would have not made it without is Flavia, my supervisor and by now also dear friend. We exchanged many exciting, deep conversation work-wise, but also on a personal level when life came crashing through our work. So thank you very much for this. And as Flavia already mentioned, it is definitely the outcome also of a lot of people, exchanges, working together, think how we can move forward together. Although I'm the only one doing this, that's a bit a strange thing. It's centered around supposedly one person, but there's many people involved. Also, thank you to Chris Julian, my other super advisor, Lonnie van Brummelen, De Waar, Willem van Weelde, many other people. I see Benny there in the back. Benny, hey. Benny is an amazing sound artist and composer who's basically part of, I don't know, 80% of the works. Also, nice that you're here. I want to thank Gabor, Lumi, and Noma for being my home in a way. Okay, so here we go. I get this question a lot, like, what is this model that you're doing? It's a PhD, right? So I thought I'd summarize some of the elements that, just so we start off with the same mindset of what this trajectory actually was. So I was drawn to this invitation when I found out it was not an actual PhD, because the artwork is supposed to be judged on its own merits. There is no written dissertation involved, and the model is a bit the masterpiece, where you can work on a longer on a project. And so this I thought was very interesting. Also, how the model is supposedly leading towards a body of works rather than a written dissertation. And I also like this last sentence, to establish a stronger relationship between the art world and artists doing research. You would expect PhD, it would say the academic world maybe, but here it says art world. So this was from publication in 2020. The model is set up that you work with one partner. In my case, this was the Waag, but it didn't fully materialize. So I collaborated over the years with many different partners on temporary programs, which you can see here. Museums, institutions, platforms. And here, yeah, it's a bit fast, but here are all the people. Like I said, I don't do this alone. All the people, other artists, activists, journalists, other makers involved. Okay, and then if I have to summarize my practice, it's these two words. And now I'm going to read a bit. For more than a decade, I've been investigating which material-based geographies and value systems are carved out by financial technologies and infrastructures. I focus on the effect of abstract value system on landscapes, ecosystems, historiography, and individual lives. My research is the base for new characters, stories, objects, sculpture, sound, and mixed media installations. Focusing on finance might seem limiting and problematic in many ways, but for me, finance is an undeniable force in reshaping our relationships, our world, and how it is imagined. The logic of finance has the potential to turn everything and everyone into an entity, a thing, from which value can be extracted and can be owned by someone else. As an artist, I'm drawn to this field because it has the capability to trade in something that doesn't exist or doesn't exist yet. Like finance, art is a producer of imagination, obviously for different objectives. Its vocabulary of abstracting the world into properties that can be subtracted, cut, mixed, recombined, sculpted, and recirculated. That's the vocabulary financial experts often use. And this vocabulary is also familiar to us as artists. So both finance and art break down boundaries, forge new connections, and construct new worlds, although both domains do so for very different reasons and objectives. If I have to summarize my practice, I would say it's like building a car while already driving. For me, work is an ecosystem of elements searching for its balance. The media I use hold unrealized potential, a future promise like a perpetual rehearsal. And research for me is about finding and prototyping new forms of processing, understanding, and expressing the world around us. This was my proposal in 2020, the beginning. In a time when financial markets are trading in potential future catastrophes, my research starts from this question. What is there left to say about a future that has already been mapped, calculated, and financialized as a catastrophe? To overcome this paralysis, my core question is how the catastrophe can become an emancipatory moment, activating vertigo and disorientations as condition for navigation and knowledge production. Contemporary fears of losing ground, as we see in prediction models, catastrophe bonds, border control, survival strategies, are fueled by industries exploiting anxiety. For those who can afford it, avoiding disaster is paramount. Yet for many communities already experiencing colonization and environmental destruction, the catastrophe is a lived reality. Their role already ended. It's not a speculative scenario. My trajectory, the evacuated, was set out how to reframe the catastrophe, move beyond the discourse of doom and the narratives of techno-capitalism, extractivism, and ecological collapse. The title, The Evacuated, refers to a community or someone or something being in a state of vertigo disorientation, where an exit from the familiar due to an imminent threat leads to uncertainty and grief. The disorientation can stem from internal or external shifts, causing suspensions of focus on time and space. The key question is how to embrace the state and navigate the world from it. Exploring whether this temporary vertigo can lead to reorientation, resetting the senses, body, and mind, my plan was divided into 3 clusters. The evacuated voice was centered around developing an artificial voice that rethinks language and explores new ways of vocalization and listening. The evacuated I focused on technical images made by machines for other machines in order to learn how we can expand vision beyond human perception. The evacuated future investigates the financialization of the future to catastrophe bonds. It's important to say that my Creator Doctus trajectory was situated within the Algorithmic Cultures research cell at Sonnenberg Institute. As an artistic process focused on direction rather than goals, my proposal was to challenge machine learning's goal-oriented optimization. Is artificial vertigo and improvisation possible in this context? How can a human-machine co-creation process be led by disorientation rather than stability? Ultimately, my intention was to activate and stay in a state of disorientation where the entanglement of language code, material sounds, and predictive structures become a new protocol for art making. During my CRD trajectory, I developed 13 projects, here clustered around, we will go through them in a bit. These works vary a lot. Some works identify, index, give an image or present to a phenomenon, while other works are more a kind of immersive experience or a sensorial experience. Throughout this trajectory, as I mentioned, I worked with different institutions, collaborators, friends, and found different ways to finance the production of these projects. Because it's really amazing that as an artist you're supported for these years, but all the projects that I'm showing, it's not financed by the trajectory, it's found in other ways. It's been quite a dizzying experience, making work in a state of vertigo. I prefer that you rather experience all the works rather than me talking about it now, but most of the works are not on show, that's already passed, so that's why we do this. And so we're just gonna dive into some fragments, images, text about the different projects. This is also a funny image, I want to share it because I had to make a plan. What you have to do if you do trajectory like that. Looks very clean and simple. But yeah, it was quite hard. I worked very iteratively and very process-based, so to think ahead 3 years was a kind of difficult exercise, but valuable. I came up with this. But then, 1 month in the trajectory, Corona happened and everything got messed up. Which maybe for this trajectory was actually a blessing in disguise. That's about instability. Okay, so I wanted to read a little fragment. 1 month in this trajectory, I wrote a short essay for Metropolis M, and I'll read a little snippet from it. The air is suspicious. A runner passes from behind as you're about to inhale. He coughs a little. Did the air exiting his lungs enter yours? You breathe as an individual, but air is collective, a messenger from and to us all. Sound waves, smells, dust particles, pollen, and microbes. Air circulates the invisible and intangible around you all the time. You are unaware of air until it is corrupted. The respiratory system switches to defense mode. Your breathing is interrupted by sniffs, sneezes, coughs, and gasps. While for people with respiratory disease, air is always suspicious, the coronavirus brought a new shared conscience for most other people. Air is social, but now also unpredictable, a new source of risk. Daily graphs of infections, hospitalization, ventilators, and deaths signal that the air you're surrounded by is potentially lethal. You tiptoe around your family and friends trying to find a new way of being together, of breathing together. Air gives life, but when corrupted, it can choke many at once. Uncertainty flows through lungs and communities. For the quarantined mind, it's hard to imagine how the air of today, the air of 2020, March, was already modeled and predicted by computer models a decade ago. Not only instructed by pandemic scientists, but also by financial vehicles that model, price, and trade future suspicious air as pandemic insurance bonds. In June 2017, the first pandemic catastrophe bond was issued by the World Bank. This revolutionary instrument was designed to offer the poorest countries immediate disaster relief in case of a pandemic outbreak. The idea behind this pandemic bond was to spread the financial risk of a pandemic among investors to relieve vulnerable communities from risk and pain. Since 2016, I intensely examined these cat bonds, catastrophe bonds, financial instruments designed to manage risk from natural and man-made disasters such as hurricanes, tsunamis, flood, terror attacks, and pandemics. Emerging in the mid-90s, in response to increasing weather volatility caused by climate change, cat bonds help governments and insurance companies transfer financial risk to private investors. These bonds are built on predictions of future catastrophes, using historical and scientific data to model potential events, including locations, impacts, death, wounded, and damages. Cat bonds function as a high-risk, high-reward investment. If a catastrophe bond occurs within the specified conditions and timeline, the bond buyer loses their investment. If no qualifying disaster happens, or its impact falls short of the defined thresholds, the bond user pays the investor a high interest rate. This binary structure makes cat bonds a speculative bet, appealing to private investors due to the potential for high returns. Despite the risk, only a few cat bonds ever issued have been triggered by actual disaster, making losses relatively rare so far. In a growing series of lightboxes, I've collected all cat bonds issued since the mid-90s. Arranging them on a timeline according to the insurance and maturity dates, a visual theater of prediction algorithms forecasting speculative catastrophes. Although the work of collecting and processing these bonds is very tedious and slow, the simple indexical act of creating these lightboxes is to give form to something that is invisible to the human eye. You see close-up. Examining these timelines reveal that out of the more than 800 cat bonds issued since the mid-90s, very few were triggered by actual catastrophes, resulting in loss of underlying capital. Most cat bonds remain untriggered and keep circulating as lucrative fictions within financial markets. Conceptually, a cat bond distributes the impact of a disaster, like an earthquake, across the globe, so nobody truly feels its effects. Yet on a closer inspection, it becomes evident that this distribution benefits only Western interest, while the rest of the world is not relieved from pain. Cat bonds function as machines that protect private wealth, property, and lives in the West, while discriminating against those outside the privileged sphere. Finance in this context is a tool for preservation and hedging against losses in the first world, embedding future trauma within its mechanisms. The cat bond urgency as a concept lies in its role as a predictive discourse of doom, one that narrates, financializes, and capitalizes on the future as catastrophe. Unfortunately, the pandemic bond did not turn out the way it was intended. During the Ebola epidemic started in 2018, the cat bond paid out only 31 million to the 13-month outbreak, while having the investors paid out 80 million in premiums, which is at odds with the speed of an infectious disease and should be contained. So more people were making money off, let's say not enough people were dying in the right place, in the right order geographically. So the investors kept getting high return on interest, while the bond should have been triggered and then money should have gone to these communities, but that didn't happen. Yes, that's what I was saying. The air you breathe today is not only corrupted by the coronavirus, but by financial speculation and capitalist expansion that started many years ago. How do we keep breathing if our ecosystem and social respiratory system continue to be choked by capitalism and cat bonds? How do we breathe when the air remains suspicious? The pandemic cat bond is at the core, triggers the core question of my trajectory. Again, I repeat, in a world where financial markets trade in potential future catastrophe, what agency remains? What can still be said about a future already mapped, calculated, and financialized as a catastrophe? My initial attempt to address this question started the year before Diving Reflex. This work tries to reframe the term catastrophe, originally from Greek tragedy, where it signified a sudden twist in the story's resolution. Only later it became associated with natural disasters in the 18th century. The sculptural sound installation explores survival strategies through the fictionalized characters of The Last Man and Elaine Morgan, using the human diving reflex as a conceptual tool. The work critiques catastrophe bonds which commodify potential disasters for profit. On the cat bond calendar lightbox, on the right here, another version, the future of Western societies are reduced to financial speculation, with the last man embodying privileged rehearsal of scarcity and despair. In contrast, in the sound composition, Elaine is inspired by Welsh feminist writer Elaine Morgan, which draws on the aquatic ape hypothesis, suggesting the diving reflex, linking throat, mouth, and brain, enabled humans to hum, sing, and ultimately speak. While Morgan's reflex gives rise to a new voice in times of catastrophe, the last man loses his. When starting the CRD trajectory here at Sandberg Institute, I proposed making Elaine into an artificial voice. Experts deemed it technically unfeasible, estimating it would take another 3 PhDs to achieve this. As a result, Elaine evolved into a metaphor for the challenges of AI rather than an artistic expression. This shift prompted questions. What is artificial intelligence? What is intelligence? What do we expect from it? And isn't intelligence inherently cultural and therefore already always artificial? Since I could not build Elaine, I started to write letters to Elaine. This was also just because we were all at home at our kitchen table. I read a fragment of this letter to you. March 21. Dear Elaine, a year has passed and we still haven't been able to meet. I've had many thoughts about you, but so far there's little proof of your existence outside of my head. You are elusive, but not impossible, I hope. I close my eyes and hear you. I imagined your voice many times. I may know what you sound like, but not know how to bring you into this world, my world made of atoms and dust. In your absence, I am to write a biography for you, which was suggested by Flavia, actually. Elaine, you were born out of a catastrophe. The catastrophe was the emergence of language, although language was not a catastrophe for everyone. For those who see the world as a noisy place, language became that which gives it meaning. meaning around which communities can form while they were stabbing off the noise. Noise is also another word for creatures like you, Elaine, the barbarian, the animal, the outsider, the other. Oh. The catastrophe of language that gave birth to you introduced a code. Those that share the same code, the same language, form a community. But the problem is there is always a kind of noise, a rasp, a rustle, a stammer that doesn't belong. Where there is a shared code, something is shut out. And so the only true community that is possible is the community without a code, without a language. Alfonso Linguist calls this the community that has nothing in common. We could also call it the community of the dying, the community that excludes no one. You belong to the community of the dying, Elaine. You were born out of errors, anomalies, mutations, disorders, and noise. But the catastrophe of language prevents us from listening to you. We don't know how to listen to the community of the dying. Perhaps it's not that you need to learn to speak, Elaine, but that we need how to learn to listen to the dying. Okay, a small shift here. What lies ahead in the future? We can't know, yet we are consumed by worry all the time. In a risk society, where concerns about potential threats to the status quo shape governance and culture, risk circulates as both an economic and cultural artifact. This fixation influences not only how we spend on insurance, safety measures, and preemptive policies, but also how we dream, feel, speak, and perceive ourselves and others. Risk management permeates daily life, from personal decisions to global challenges. However, much like wealth, risk is unequally distributed across populations, profoundly shaping quality of life. While traditional class structures were built on the accumulation of wealth, in a risk society, social status often hinges on the ability to avoid risk. This raises critical questions. Who has the privilege to shield themselves from risk? And paradoxically, who has the privilege to embrace risk, to take risk, a necessary step for growth and progress? These diagrammatic drawings, here on the photo, were sort of first attempt flowcharts to think about how risk could be distributed in a fairer way. Someone who was in the position to take a lot of risks was Johanna Borsky. Better known as the widow Borsky, born in 1764, and this lady is today celebrated as the role model for Dutch entrepreneurs for her role in the early days of the Dutch Central Bank and founding of the ABN AMRO. However, her and her husband's co-financing with Hope & Co., predecessor of ABN AMRO, facilitated the Louisiana Purchase and the founding of the Louisiana Citizen Bank. This bank was specialized in plantation credits, so handing mortgages to owners of plantations. Her history shows a more complicated and troubling figure. Her emancipation and entrepreneurship as a woman in the Netherlands were unpinned by the enslavement and exploitation of people elsewhere. The value that was extracted from the lands and plantations and the body of enslaved people in Louisiana was, through her overseas bank activities, distributed to her Elswoud estate in Haarlem. Picture of today. In a video essay called Study for Attachment 2, I bring together the conversation between these two landscapes haunted by these 18th, 19th century Dutch investment in slavery. Elswoud, the idyllic former country estate of Borsky, now a national park, and the plantations along the Mississippi River in Louisiana, with their legacy of environmental racism. Connecting the two distant landscapes is a musical composition developed in collaboration with composer Dennis Thompson, And this music composition voices the name of enslaved people who became property of the Citizen Bank of Louisiana, now part of J.P. Morgan Chase. Nelson, Philip, Sylvester, Sally and her 2 children, and hundreds of others, as well as many unnamed individuals, were inscribed as collateral for defunded plantation loans. So if plantation owners couldn't pay the mortgage, the enslaved people of the plantation would become owned by the bank. And these are the names that we're working with. Listed by parishes in bank books, I retrieved in a really strange, accidental way from a server online, a PDF called Attachment 2. This was the front, and that's where all these names were listed. And the question was how to do, I had this list on my computer for 6 years, and this was a very difficult project, but it was also, this list is not accessible anywhere else. So with this came a bit of responsibility to think what to do with this list. So I created a group of people around this project. This first video essay that we won't look at, of course, but that I'm showing you some behind-the-scene image, gives a glimpse into the ongoing film, music, and spoken word project made in close collaboration with Dennis Thompson II and poet Jürgen Gario. The artistic research is interpreted and reverberated through the bodies and voices of 8 performers: Syndica, Deborah, Tess, Jules, Irene, Anya, Hassie, Dennis, and Jürgen. Uprooted trees on the former Borsky estate, majestically and fallen, serve as a backdrop for them to honor the names and lives of those reduced to fuel for colonial capitalism. In the film's epilogue, the past is still present. Currently, in the 135 strip of land, now nicknamed Cancer Alley, in which petrochemical plants now occupy the former plant sites, poisoning the lands and communities of enslaved descendants, stoking the fires of the climate crisis, leaving Gario to wonder out loud. Healthy and free, we ask, when will we, when will we? Environmental racism is perpetuated in Cancer Alley and categorizes the world into those deemed worthy of protection and those who are excluded. Risk amplifies existing gender and racial equalities. Where affluent individuals such as the widow Borsky are considered valuable assets for the Dutch current female entrepreneur project, poor and racialized communities in Louisiana are labeled as high risk, deepening social and environmental justices. The theme of environmental injustice continues with this project on trade-off. At the core of this long-term collaboration is our artist collective On Trade-Off, initiated by the artist-run space Enough Room for Space in Brussels and Picha in Lubumbashi, Democratic Republic of Congo, of which I'm a member of the collective. Together we explore another high-risk operation, financial risk operation, this time in the Manono region in the DRC. This is us, by the way. We know each other for a long time, before we started working together in 2018, but this is how we often meet. On Trade-Off started 2018, finished this year, investigated the mythological and strategic dimensions of green energy. The collective emerged in response to the discovery of a major lithium deposit in Manono, the DRC, a site marked by historical extractivism and now central to a green energy future. Here's some images. People believe also that lithium is around in the ground, so they even dig around their own house, as you can see here. As Manono became the focus of speculation and potential exploitation, we as On Trade-Off developed counter-narratives uprooted in reciprocity, shared resources, free tools, and fair practice. The collective's work emphasized dismantling hierarchical dynamics between technological knowledge holder and those who are expected to catch up fostering alternative modes of collaboration and creation. Over the 6 years of our collaboration, we as on Trade-off exhibited internationally and contributed to artistic and academic platforms, imagining a different way of making art in this time. Within this collective, I developed a video essay called A Prelude to When the Dust Unsettles. And building on our collective research into the potential lithium extraction in Manono, I concentrated, me as part of the group, I particularly concentrated on the financial speculation on the discovery of lithium in Manono. And in particular, how contemporary visualization technologies employed in geological prospecting anticipate and migrate future risk within the mineral extraction industry. Here you see some images. In the video installation, I examine how visualization systems and mineral extraction processes mutually enforce each other. Long before any mineral is physically extracted, it is calculated, mapped, and visualized through supercomputers. Because the desired resources are locked deep underground, they first need a visual placeholder to circulate within the economic and political systems, boardrooms, before they can circulate materially. In this way, visuality precedes profit. From a safe distance, international mining companies such as AVZ in Australia, who mines in Manono, employ advanced technology, remote sensing, computational modeling, machine learning, to create highly detailed digital models of future mining projects well before the ore is removed from the ground. These so-called digital twins simulate a hyper-clean futuristic mine to attract investors and secure political approval, presenting an idealized pixel-perfect vision of extraction. However, these digital twins composed of data points, polygons, and gigabytes obscure the physical and social cost underpinning them. Dust-filled air, polluted ecosystem, endangered species, exploited workers, and depleted landscapes. The digital rendering makes it nearly impossible to trace the toxic realities and human exploitation that support the gleaming profitability they advertise. This is a picture of the installation. It includes a topographical model of Manono on which a video essay is projected. This essay, constructed from found footage, I collected for 3 years long promotional videos of these corporate mining companies constructing digital twins, since the actual software they use was around $30,000 per year. So I collected a lot of material that they were promoting themselves, and with that I created a kind of fictional digital twin of Manono. Drawing on the aesthetic qualities of digital simulation, the video stages a dialogue between Manono's physical landscape, its actual landscape, and the digital twin. It juxtaposes the fractured realities of virtual idealism with the lived experience of Manono's environment and community. In the work, there's also recordings that we actually made of Manono sound recordings, so it clashes these two realities. This is a good moment to reflect on the relation between art and theory, which I don't really do so much. But an interesting moment occurred here with this project, which I thought would be interesting to highlight. My position is that rather than illustrating theory, that art should be illustrating theory, which I think quite some artistic PhD end up doing. I'm interested in how art can challenge the theoretical views. So this is from an article that was recently published. If we can read it together. Taking the recent discussions of the extractive view as a starting point, this article focuses on the role of visual culture in prospecting. It investigates how the search for resources generates a visual culture of prospecting and a visual culture about prospecting, whether through aerial views of resources frontiers, speculative images, and attract venture capital of specimen views that isolate objects of economic interest. Tracing a path from the 19th century survey photographs of Timothy O'Sullivan to contemporary works by the likes of Edith Morales and the group on Trade-off, It demonstrates how artists repurpose and diversify the visual culture of prospecting, documenting the forces at play in the struggle over lithium extraction or investigating the methods by which genetic raw materials are turned into patentable commodities. We continue with the article. With the thresholds of detectability, aerial views are certainly one way to populate a landscape, and often bound up in processes of spectacular accumulation in places like Manono. The diversity of tools and visualization at work in the video, A Prelude to When the Dust Unsettles, the one I made, demonstrates that contemporary prospecting can function perfectly well without the kind of overhead view that has historically facilitated various forms of expression. Both Senga, George, this is George Senga, another member of our collective, both Senga's photograph and Herregraven's video demonstrate the plurality of extractive views at play in mineral prospecting, where the dichotomy is not simply between vertical-horizontal axes of vision, but between landscapes as products of layered histories and multi-species relation, and landscapes as the barrel of future desires focused on a handful of lucrative resources. As complementary perspectives on the same physical location, Senga's photographs show how the aerial view can be a bearer of complex social forces beyond extraction, while Herregraven's video reveals how the visual culture of contemporary prospect is more heterogeneous than existing scholarship might suggest. Taking together as two outcomes of the collective project on trade-off, they demonstrate how such artist-generated knowledge infrastructures have the capacity to both mirror and undermine the production of visual culture that support extractive endeavors. Okay, and then this is maybe the quote that I travel with in this trajectory and in my head a long time, because there's always this moment that, I don't know, the notion of research and theory is a little bit haunting. So this is from my former advisor at Rijksacademie. And I really, looking at what we were looking at earlier, the article and how art can also challenge the theoretical consensus, I want to read this one to you. Art should fight against theory and unravel it to play out its outcomes negatively. It is not merely a space for the artist, the curator, and the audience to congratulate themselves on their theoretical weightlifting, intelligence, and progressive ideas. Rather, it is a place for negative criticality, where theory is used not affirmatively, but as a measuring stone, where it is tested out if it can survive the blow of arts. Critical art practice is a critique of critical theory. Now, it's important to show a few images of maybe also what this means in terms of what we were doing. So I just want to show you a few images of how a work and how the works within this collective can change. So, for example, this video installation, it changed. It was responsive to spaces. Here at Frame of Frame, it took a different form. When it was presented in Lubumbashi Biennial, it was presented in a house like this. But the more important thing I want to talk about is a timeline. So when we started with the project, 2018, I started to make it was such a complex reality also not being from there. So I started making a sort of mapping how the laws and legislative framework there in Manono with the mining was taking place. So I started making these maps, timelines to understand it just for myself. Just some fragments of it, how it always transformed. And then at one point, this timeline was there, and then a few members in Lubumbashi proposed the idea that we should show this map, should start using it as a tool. You know, it was made by one person, but we could all add to it, and it could become public and could be used also by local inhabitants. And but then the question also emerged: could this idea of transparency actually put someone at risk? Because for us here in Europe, it's all about creating transparency, but transparency and insight into these things can locally actually create danger for certain people. So this was we discussed this for a long time. And then in the end, we decided to show it. So this was in Belgium first. It was presented like this with archival material from our collective archive. This is also an important thing to say. All the work that we do, all the research, all the material we generate can be used by everyone else. So we try to foster this anti-extractivist logic by working in a different way. And so here, the timeline was traveling to Lubumbashi Biennial. I want to read you this little bit from an email. Oh, sorry. Yeah, here. So this is from Alexander, local artist also there. And he says, I want to change the representation of a timeline into a wheel that turns. It marks the paradox of a situation that will never change. The Congolese feel stuck in a cycle with return of the same problems, questions. So he actually added that the timeline, should become a cylinder. So as a cylinder, this timeline existed for a while, and then when it traveled, people were making annotations, and then eventually traveled back here, and we were adding images. But yeah, you see the timeline kept transforming by the contribution of everyone. So thus I also just want to point out, this collective way of working and what we were trying to do with it. Also, it's important when you're talking about these projects, like, what is the audience? It's definitely not an academic audience, The audience for these projects, it's a very didactic project. We were making this project to generate attention and channel basically financial means from here to there. So we also made a website that is accessible on a phone that uses hardly any data. Not for us, but more for local people there. So it's an ASCII, only if you click on the image and you want to download it, does it, but it uses very little energy on mobile phones. Okay. So from creating this timeline, I want to switch to another project, which is about creating an archive. And this was a very intense collaboration with Benny sitting there at the top also. This work is called 20 Birds Inside Her Chest. Here the question was, how can a new voice emerge from a catastrophic moment? 20 Birds Inside a Chest is a sculptural sound installation commissioned by 13 Gwangju Biennial, made in close collaboration with the sound artist composer B.J. Nielsen. Here you can also see it currently at Radius. It's still up to February 23. This work explores the aquatic voice as a site of resistance in time of ecological catastrophe. Following Elaine Morgan's controversial hypothesis that humans evolved isolated as semi-aquatic primates and not from the mighty male hunter, 20 Birds Inside a Chest interprets the bodily instinct of the Hanjo, the female freedivers in Jeju Island, South Korea, through a living sound archive of the Sumbisori, the high-pitched whistle emitted by the Hanjo as they resurface from the deep water. These are the communities. The youngest, they were between 68 and 87, the female divers we worked with. So the work focuses on, did I already say that, the Sumbisori? No, okay. Often described as lilting and haunting, the sound of the Sumbisori is the result of a forceful expulsion of carbon dioxide and inhaling again when they take fresh oxygen. The Sumbisori symbolizes not only the adaptation of the Hanjo, the women of the sea, the divers, to the water, but also the movement of moving between life and death, of overcoming the moment. The Hanjo always say they dive with a coffin on their back. So when they enter the water, they enter a space between life and death. The archive of the Sumbisori is intended to preserve the Hanjo's aquatic voice of communal survival and was returned to the community following the biennial. 20 Birds Inside Her Chest amplifies the collective voice and allows us to experience the watery commons of Jeju, the home to these matriarchal diving communities who are not only known for their physical strength and endurance, but also their fight for social justice and political freedom. With fragility, resistance, and collectivity, these indigenous marine biologists hold immense experience and knowledge about the natural system they dive in every day. And here's some images of how mostly Benny also worked with them during the pandemic to record them at sea, finding inventive ways to dive with them. The Sumbi-Suri sound composition are presented through 8 sculptures informed by the shape of the human larynx, something that comes back in multiple of my works, and are situated in a circular structure called the Bulteyok, in which the Henjo engaged in shamanistic rituals and community meetings. The aquatic choir, the recordings, would later be used to train a voice AI Elaine. Also on view are here on the bottom right objects. They're replicas of a Dutch harpoon that surfaced on the Korean shoreline 450 years ago by an aquatic body, a pierced whale. In 1653, a Dutch sea trading ship en route from Java to Japan shipwrecked nearby Jeju Island, Korea, the island where this whole project is situated. 36 Europeans washed on shore, causing stir among locals. These Europeans were imprisoned on Jeju and the mainland, and some escaped eventually to Japan 13 years later. The Dutch Hendrik Hamel, the ship's bookkeeper, later published Hamel's journal and the description of a kingdom of Korea, the first Western account of Korea, earning him the local recognition in Korean history. Hamel's journals mention a stranded whale found in Korea on shore during those 13 years with a Dutch harpoon embedded in it. A crew member who had worked in the Dutch Greenland fishery near Nova Zembla identified it as a Dutch harpoon. It was not from the VOC, but very likely from the whale hunter Willem Barents, because the harpoon carried the initials WB. The found of the harpoon in the whale's body suggested that this whale had traveled from the Barents Sea near Nova Zembla, Greenland, to Korea, implying a passage connecting the Arctic and Pacific Oceans, something that was not known at the time. The whale is not the only dying body that I've been looking at as a guide and trying for us to understand and make sense of the world. The central character in the film, The Murmur of the Dying, is an artificial intelligence voice called Elaine that I developed together with Gabe Zalatnyai, there in the back. AI learns language-based communication by interpreting language as code and by filtering out noise. Sounds like sighs, gasps, or or are often categorized as noise and omitted from translation into code. In order to train Elaine, a variety of sound recordings were necessary, but you cannot really find these anywhere. All the things that are normally filtered out, where does it go? So I needed to construct my own sort of database collection. In my database, I used medicinal recordings of individuals with respiratory disease, people with speech impairments, members of my own family, like the babbling of my 2 infants, and the breathing and mumbling of my parents on their dying bed. It's important to say that I never made these recordings with the intention to train an AI. I had made these recordings because I was struck by the emerging voice of a baby, or I wanted to listen to, I had this idea, I want to remember my mom's name, voice after she passed. That's why I recorded them, for very personal reasons. Eventually, I used them to train Elaine. With this work, I approached complex questions regarding illness and moments in which linguistic and visual codes that we are accustomed to and have efficient communication cease to exist. If AI is trained to see patterns and make sense of sound and signals in this work, signals cannot reliably be distinguished from noise, and noise cannot be translated into linguistic code. In delving into questions around AI, voice, language, breath, community, and death, I ask what forms of communications might lie beyond language, and whether a shared language is needed to create a community. As AI plays an increasing role in our day-to-day lives, a crucial question is whether we will be able to learn to decipher nuances of voice and empathy beyond language and words. Can AI relate to moments where words simply fail, such as sitting by a person's deathbed? The sound composition of the film is made by Benny Nielsen with fragments of Elaine's generated voice. The sound is juxtaposed with the film that consists out of 18,000 frames, which are all manually added medical scans. Behind each frame, so each scan in the film, there is one patient facing a terminal illness. The people underpinning these images form, for me, the community of the dying. The community that is not shaped around language or patterns, but forged in the noise instead. The complex differences between these clinical images visualize the individuality and diversity that become audible in the voice of Elaine. Elaine, the incalculable human. How do you create a model that resists modeling, that resists categorization? This is a bit the paradox in this question, of course, and being at the algorithmic cultures research cell. From the incalculable human that Elaine represents, we go to the incalculable volcano. Are you still okay, everyone? I'm trying to read as fast as I can, but okay. Okay, I'm in breath. Okay. Yeah, that's a good idea, yeah. That's why I never read from it. You always feel rushed, but yeah. Okay, so amid the current reality where volcanic eruptions are trading at lightning speeds on financial markets, this project, A Petrified Forest and Calculated Plume, activates the Merapi volcano on Java Island as an examination, a nonlinear one, to investigate the relations between geologic, financial, technological environment. Since the beginning of the Dutch colonial era, the Merapi volcano on Java Island has been the most surveyed volcano in the world. It is subjected to intense scientific monitoring, prediction, research, and more recently, financial speculation. Merapi, which is the physical and spiritual home to many local communities, has since 2021 been enveloped inside a financial algorithm of the first ever volcanic catastrophe bond. My favorite subject, as you know. A Petrified Forest and a Calculated Plume explores how the cosmology of Merapi unsettles the progressive algorithm of surveillance. Initially, the surveillance was executed by the Dutch colonial government, then by the scientific community, and now by financial investors. The mixed media installation brings together a 20-million-year-old petrified forest from Java. So these are pieces of petrified wood that were created during the last volcanic eruption on this island. Colonial drawings, but also live webcam footage from Merapi, and its animated calculated ash plume. Together, they form the mythology of the volcano, where the mythology of science, which believes that Merapi can be predicted, merges with the local mythology. I wish I could show you this video, but I cannot, so I'm just gonna show you some images of the installation. but let's look at this one, yeah. The work is also a reminder of the volcano's ability to melt everything into a shapeless mass in which not only matter, but also which language, definition, and separation of opposites cease to exist. Marape's potential for destruction defies the progressive algorithm of the volcanic cat bond. I'm going to read you a little fragment of the script of the video essay. That is, where is it? Where is it? Yeah. So on the right you have the video essay, and on the left you always have the live webcam footage. So here it's of course dark because we have the time difference. Okay, Merape. This is where Earth ends and begins, a sacred place. Merape means making fire. A local spirit kingdom resides inside the volcano. The volcano has as many myths as it does magma. The volcano cannot be fully grasped by the human mind. The volcano is a god, we say, the gate to hell, a place inaccessible for the living, a metaphor. Inside the ring of fire, the local spirit mythology merges with the mythology of science. There is just something about the volcano, existence that cannot be explained in human terms. We struggle with the prehistoric origin of the volcano. It is the world before man. The volcano is not the gate to hell, but a portal to the cosmos of formlessness, a formless world without thought, categories, a very concrete reality. When the volcano erupts, its formlessness comes out, a formless blob of lava, a formless ash plume. Although the volcanic cat bond tried to use its ash plume to trigger financial markets, because they calculated the size of it, its ash plume remains incalculable. The volcano is pre-ego, in which nothing is defined or separated. It is anti-algorithmic. Merape is a paradox. It is both a geological void and a physical form, capable of emitting lava, gas, ashes recorded by the human eye. Merape holds the memory of how life began. It's a spiritual geology, the profound existence of rock before life. Rather than containing all potential images of creation, the volcano is the image of creation. An ancient rock of fire, a place inaccessible for the living, immeasurable to science. Merape's lava contains geological time. When the volcano spits, it spits time, non-linear time. This is beyond human comprehension. The volcano is the true alchemist. A tree covered in volcanic ashes becomes stone. This stone melts and becomes lava, which flows down a mountain and makes way for fertile soil, which gives birth to a new forest, until it becomes the volcano again. Unlike the climate, the volcano is unpredictable, incalculable, and resists modeling, just like the weather. We're getting there, we're getting there. This next work was commissioned by Nottingham Contemporary in the UK, which embarked on an experiment developed by the artists Celine Condorelli, me, Grayson Dieterou, and novelist Liz Jensen. We were asked to develop a future scenario for Nottingham and the exhibition. We created the following scenario. This exhibition travels to the end of the century, featuring works from the last 400 million years. Oh, yay. Okay. The exhibition is a sci-fi novel, or vice versa. Crossing the gallery threshold, the visitor steps into a potential future world. The world has been reshaped by decades of crisis and collapses. That was the scenario. There was also research war, plastic-eating bacteria, and a flooding. Once known as Nottingham, the Silver City is now set against the backdrop of fire seasons and widening waterways. Here, communities have embraced different forms of color production, weather forecasting, and spirituality. In the last gallery of the museum, I explored through a sculptural sound installation called Wet Spells how a community finds new ways of making meaning in the world after ecological and mental collapse. How does one build a conception of the world while new emergencies are waiting around the corner? How is daily life structured around prediction and instant preparedness? The work explores the entangled history and potential future of weather forecasting. The work marks a stark contrast between our physical senses on the one hand and the abstract field of research into global climate changes by computational weather forecasting systems, which exist in complete isolation from our experiences at daily life. By contrast, the work enters traditional methods of sensing where weather is assessed and predicted by an infinite amount of locally observed variables and physical experiences, historically often jotted down in church archives, dated back some 800 years. Unlike the stable and predictable historical view of the climate, modern meteorology grapples with the inherent irregularity of atmospheric phenomena, which cannot be fully measured or reproduced in controlled conditions. Weather, fleeting and chaotic, has always resisted precise calculation, making it historically the domain of farmers and sailors rather than formal science. Michel Serres highlights its exclusion from modern scientific canon due to its unpredictability and says, "The weather now and the weather to come infinitely surpasses our account of them, so they are of no account. Because it is the place of disorder and the unforeseeable, of local danger, of formlessness, because it is the weather of another time." Local weather knowledge, historically crucial for sailors and farmers, derives from direct observations rather than science. Weather lore, an informal tradition of recording and sharing insights, once played a key role in understanding atmospheric dynamics. However, it has been largely supplanted by modern scientific methods of weather forecasting, modeling, production. For this project, I collaborated with David the weatherman, and also with Benny again there at the top. David well, now he's a bit older, 82 years old, and he holds, he never studied this, but he holds the only indigenous weather title, PhD in UK. As a former police officer, he always talked to a lot of farmers, was interested in their notebooks, and started to create, over the course of 13 years, a sort of method by reading a lot of these church weather journals and talking to the farmers, a method to predict the weather himself. And so on his website, he each week, produces a weather prediction for the next 90 days. And what is quite crazy is that his weather predictions are so incredibly complex. So he looks at the leaves, if they have if the berries are bigger but maybe more softer than last year, all these kind of really HD, like a lot of parameters. His weather predictions are so accurate that he showed me this email from the royal house where they ask him for advice on the wedding day of Kate and William. And he gets more of these requests. He also told me just before I worked with him that he did a workshop of 3 weeks with MIT, Massachusetts, where they would try to put his knowledge, create an app, basically. And so I prototyped with him for 3 weeks, but in the end they had to conclude that his knowledge was too many parameters, too complex, they couldn't put it in the app. So that was of course great. The installation, the final installation, involves a ghostly radio station broadcasting a sound piece into the ether around the museum. It includes the voice of Nottingham school children. It responds to real-time real-time data from weather station installed on the gallery roof. Here. Okay. So there's these sculptures with a sort of DIY antenna, devices to receive out and send out information. These sculptures were made with scrap metals such as driftwood from the 2021 floods in south of Netherlands. Also the village where I was born, that's where I collected it. These sculptures send out a 5-channel work that contains a mix of sound recordings from Nottingham that Benny made. Here. It includes these voices of these children from Nottingham that actually pronounce ancient weather lore as a sort of weather spells. So they're casting these weather spells. And as I said, there is on the roof, we installed the weather station, and the data that is picked up from the atmosphere there is live mixed into the sound installation. So the whole idea was, is there a way that we can bring the atmosphere, the weather, into the gallery space? There was also this element, an interactive element that kind of was a bit part of the scenario where people were asked to make predictions about the weather. So together with a graphic designer and my old student, Benjamin Macmillan, we created this weather notation script. The idea was that now you have the standardized pictograms, but if you would need to make really fast notations about the changing sky, you would maybe develop this sort of fast way of drawing it. And so on the gallery floor, you had these signs, and on the walls, there's an index of what they would mean. And as everyday visitors would make a prediction of the weather to come. And then the gallery assistants would each day keep track of each prediction for a whole month, making another weather archive just like the ones we research in the churches. Okay. I want to show you this previous project because now we're going to the current exhibition that's at Radius. So we're almost at the end. Thank God for you also. And there I wanted to, different elements that occurred through the different projects. I wanted to all stage them in a new configuration and take them a bit to the next level. In this latest exhibition, I revisit the relationship between language and finance that I started a decade ago. My interest stems from the parallels between finance and art that emerged in the late 1960s, early 1970s. This was the moment where money was disconnected from the gold standard, and the dematerialization of the art object occurred. During this time, both finance and art started relying on concepts, language, indexes, graphs, abstraction, and both were claiming to describe something that was not there physically. Through language, both finance and art wield imagination and predictive power over the future, but for different purposes. Franco Birardo says in The Uprising on Finance and Poetry, in the age of capitalism, the economy has the place of a universal grammar, transferring different levels of human activity, and language too is defined by the limitations of its economic exchangeability. Similarly, Rose Goldens noted in 1977 in The Show and the Tell Machine, we are breeding a new generation of humans who will learn more words from a machine than from their mothers. This renewed focus on language in my work reflects a concern that language is increasingly shaped by capital and technology rather than imagination. Language is not merely a medium, but a site of contestation. Capital and language both claim the future, raising urgent questions. How can we resist the transactional and informational use of language? How could vocalization, noise, and breathing challenge this grammar and reimagine a different potential for language. Sorry, I'm editing live here, as you know. So dialect explores these questions by an interplay between vocalization, language, noise, and, very important, the ecosystem they are in. The exhibition is, I wouldn't say an exhibition, it's more like a live training experiment that focuses on how the voice is transcorporal. What I mean with that is how the voice is not just emerging from the body, but shaped by its surroundings, by its environment. In this new iteration of the voice model Elaine, that's, as you can see, a recurring character all the time in my work, Elaine is used to train, hyperlocal data is used to train Elaine. Microphones and sensors collect sound and environmental data from the ecosystem around radius and influence Elaine's vocal output. So she responds to the outdoors conditions, which also includes this, at the top right, this chemical plant next door to this Center for Art and Ecology, which is quite interesting. This process establishes a feedback loop between Elaine's voice, the gardens outside, blurring the boundaries between inside, outside, foreground, background, but also between training, who is training, and what is being trained, between the model and the one that's teaching and the one that's learning. Dialect is not only a training experiment for Elaine, as I said, but also an experiment in exhibition making. Rather than importing artistic works from elsewhere, the work and the narrative emerge from the site itself, a site which is not a neutral exhibition space, but has a past which resonates in the exhibition. The water tower, next to the exhibition space outside, was built in 1896 to combat cholera epidemics caused by contaminated canal water and marked a significant improvement in the Delft's water infrastructure. In 1919, a pumping station and underground reservoir were added to expand the capacity of the water tower. Designed to store clean water, the reservoir can be seen as a response to cholera bacteria, separating the polluted canal water with microbes from the clean drinking water, microbe-free, inside. So this is obviously immediately a separation between nature, the polluted water, and culture, the clean water inside. Interestingly, the 1929 local newspaper describes the reservoir as an algorithm and the machine room as a soul. So the author of this article was actually much more visionary, transcending this nature-culture divide. So here's some images. This is where the waterways came in, these measuring devices on the walls. The animals living outside, invasive crab species, and this snails inside. The conceptual interplay between the voice and environment, inside, outside, past, future, physical, simulated, is already inherent in Radius. The exhibition blurs these opposites into a porous, interconnected space. And here we have the thing I researched, the digital twin concept with the Manono project, returns here. In the space, there is this two large-scale projections of Radius digital twin that are made for this project. The digital twin merges Radius' historical technological past, present, and speculative future. Visually, it resembles an indoor swamp, erasing the boundaries between in and outside, past and future, much like Elaine's vocalization, which responds dynamically to the Radius environment. The simulation features entities from Radius' surrounding past, microbes, algae, trees, bird, water, gases, infrastructural fragments. These elements, for example, also, this is what I did a lot, These were the original plates that separated the water reservoir from the outside. So literally the objects of separation for nature culture. So these are outdoor in the grass. We wanted to move them in the exhibition space, but they were way too heavy. So I made digital replicas of them together with a team, and then they appear in the simulation, for example. But there's also more, let's say, digital artifacts that emerge from the game engine that then find their way into the physical exhibition in and outdoors. We're really almost there. Sorry, yeah. In the end, the simulation is a live, open-ended system where entities and temporalities interact and evolve based on fluctuating external conditions. Sensors around radius collect data on weather, soil, air, quality, and feeding contingency on predictability into the simulation via a computer that is embedded in this. Here you see part of the simulation. Yeah, this was the idea. There on the left, there's this terrarium with the computer. Unlike finance, which speculates on predefined future, the simulation embraces unpredictability as a foundation for world building. As art critic Nora Nkank observes, simulations generate multiple possibilities, challenges notions of timescale and predictability. They create modular, ever-changing narratives that demand constant adaptation. For the viewer, it's a mental dance where language, fiction, and narrative coexist with what unfolds on the screen. In the end, to bridge the gap between nature and culture, I am not focused on rejecting technology in any of my projects, actually, but on reimagining how it can be used to cultivate an ecological mindset. For me, being immersed in the planetary flows of energy, matter, and digital code calls for a new approach to both art making and being in the world. In my work, the interconnectedness of biological, social, and technological systems is key. I see biorhythms, biological rhythms, and algorithms not as opposites, but as two sides of the same coin. I don't want to conceal the technology behind my works, but instead emphasize that our understanding of ecology today is already increasingly shaped by data and technology. Yes. But there's still two more. Okay, so the Creator Doctus trajectory is finished. It was a very enriching experience and invaluable to focus on works with a deeper underlying focus. It was also a dizzying experience as I tried to make a lot of works, experiments, prototypes to understand the changing world around me. You know, building the car while you're already driving it. If someone would ask me to summarize it in one image, I think it would be this image with my 3-year-old daughter trying to make sense of the environment after just 500 trees were cut down in a local forest. I'm now able to take more distance to connect the dots in retrospect, but this was not my objective in the moment itself. Okay, and then lastly, I do want to say, this is a little bit sneak preview of 2 images, but I'm almost finishing now a work that is actually was running underneath all of these other projects that is called The Evacuated. It will be finished in the first half of 2025. This work is an immersive installation where the evolving digital forest ecosystem presented as this installation. It is inspired by the contemporary climate risk models, which propose an alternative perspective on risk. It is inspired by contemporary climate models, but proposes an alternative perspective on risk merely beyond mathematical abstract representation. Simulated in a game engine, The Evacuated merges different historical approaches to future uncertainty that we dealt with as humans, like the idea of chance, or God, or magic, science, catastrophe bonds, all into one single forest landscape. As an artistic project rather than a scientific one, it blends physical and mental landscapes, science and mythology, our future with our past. It connects mathematical predictions to our anxiety, technological solutions to animals sensing disaster, and climate models to ancient belief system and prediction practices. The Evacuated is, in a way, an accumulation of all the research, artifacts, techniques, and stories that I've collected during this trajectory over the years. As the simulation constantly builds the ecosystem up and breaks it down, there's one important thing. It gives shapes to its own formlessness, like Elaine, the incalculable voice, and Marape, the incalculable volcano. Thank you for listening.